Welcome to Coach T's Corner. Tonight, Coach T welcomes an award-winning educator who is featured in the Oprah Winfrey docu-series, Blackboard Wars, as well as Coach T's older brother, Dr. Marvin Thompson.
Our guest today has over 30 years experience in education. He started out as a fifth grade teacher and finished his career as a superintendent. He's also played football, was an All-American in college, played semi-pro football for a few years, and actually had an opportunity to play in the pros, but turned down an opportunity because he wanted to play against the best. Goes to show you his desire to be the best. And he was featured in the Oprah Winfrey docu-series Blackboard Wars several years ago, which won a couple of cable awards. And one of the reasons that I know this guy so well, because he happens to also be my older brother, so I hope you will help me welcome Dr. Marvin Thompson to the show. How you doing today, Dr. T?
Hey, I'm doing good, Coach T.
Thank you for calling me Coach T. I appreciate it very much. And appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me and share with our listeners about your experience as an educator. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, what made you want to get into education?
Well, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't know if I ever told you this story. I never did want to get into education.
What?
Man, listen, I got to tell you, this is funny. I went to college, I majored, my undergraduate degree is in psychology, right? So my goal was to go to college, go to med school and become a psychiatrist. Well, in the middle of my psychology class, this is during football season, I had a 20-page paper due, right? And it's the middle of the season. We're getting ready to travel to New York to play a game. And I had a paper due when we got back. Now, my advisor and one of my professors, psychology professors, approached me as I'm getting on the bus. Dr. Lucian T. Winnegar, God bless him. And he says, hey, Marvin, I got a deal for you. Now, he was slick. Remember, he's a psych professor. So he says, I got a deal for you. I tell you what, I got a friend down the street who teaches at elementary schools. He's having some trouble with some kids. If you go down there and work with these kids for a couple of weeks, you don't have to do this paper. Now, I'm going to be real. I gave two thoughts about them kids. All I know was that's 20 pages off my back. And all I got to do is go, whatever the promise was, all I thought was no 20-page paper. So when I got back, the bill was due. He called me up. He called me walking across campus, handed me a piece of paper with the name of the school, name of the teacher, and the classroom. Now, I'm like, Lord, man, let me go down here and deal with these bushead kids. So I get down to the school, the teacher's behind the desk. There's 5 or 6 girls in the front of the classroom sitting off to her. It's about 5 or 6 boys. And as soon as I walk in, remember, I didn't want to be there. Right. At this point, I don't even like kids. I hadn't been around kids since we were kids, right? Except our big head cousins we hung out with, right. But that's it. And I walk into the classroom and these boys just start chattering, hey man, what are you doing here? And our dad was a Marine. Right off the bat, that wall was up. Like, boy, I don't even know who you're talking to, where you come from. Not happening. It just hit me the wrong way. Right. And what I mean by the wrong way was I immediately knew you don't know any better, but I'm going to show you. And it wasn't hard for me. I think in this whole story, what I'm telling you is everything that happened was not hard for me. And I think a lot of the reasons, Coach, it wasn't hard was because of the way we were raised, right? Those things were normal in our house. And that doesn't mean better. It just means different.
Yeah.
It means different in the way that it fit into a big scheme of thinking, operating, behaving. Well, I get to the front of the classroom, the girls are giddy, hey, like girls are, ignored them, talked to the teacher. And I made the decision to sit with the girls. And again, everything I'm telling you is out of what we learned. Right. And I said very little. The teacher gave them assignments. I asked were they done. And I basically said, well, let's talk after you're finished. And I meant it. We're not talking until you're done. And they got to work. And the next day I came, I did the same thing. And by the third day, they were already working by the time I walked in the classroom. Now, remember, they're staying after school. They got 2 weeks detention. And by the third week, they were already working. And the outcome of that was, that's when I realized, well, let me back up. I went back after the 2 weeks, and my professor asked me, well, he told me, he goes, hey, my friend called and said she's just amazed at what you're able to do with these kids. She goes, she wants to know, what did you do? And I said, I didn't do anything. I did what she expected them to do. I just told them to meet these expectations, and that was it. It wasn't a lot of discussion. And that was the beginning of me moving into education. So the very next day, he set up a meeting with me with the education department. I had education as a major, so now I had two, and the rest is history.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. So, but to your point, it's similar to my story with basketball and coaching, how I'm able to connect with kids. It was our upbringing, and all we've done is just basically carried over what we learned. And it wasn't about being forced into it. It's really about connecting with kids. And you were able to connect with the kids early on, and the results were obvious, very positive. And the question would be, how many of those kids ended up back in detention? I'd probably say not many.
No, this is funny. A couple of years later, that's the same school that I did this. And by the way, I kept going back to this school for the rest of the year.
Even after?
Even after.
Wow.
That's when you realize you make a connection with kids. You realize you have that kind of impact, or are able to. It's not even that you have the impact. You're willing to put in the effort to create an impact.
Right.
Right. Every day wasn't easy. Trust me. And I could tell you, I could write a book about the stories of things that went right and wrong over 30 years with kids. But I learned one thing, and it goes back to what you were saying about our upbringing. Everybody is a product of what they have been taught and what they haven't been taught, especially when you're talking with kids. So when people say I have a bad kid, I'm like, nope, you have a kid with some gaps. And the behaviors you're looking at is sometimes them screaming out for someone to pay attention to them to help close that gap. They don't know any better.
Right.
We know that the frontal lobe development of adolescents, and we call them adults, your frontal lobe doesn't formulate, and that's where your decision-making model is, where you make choices, you evaluate consequences for your actions. That doesn't really become a solid operating system, so to speak, until you're 24 or 25. So why are you yelling at an 11-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, thinking that choice was based on your ability to make that choice?
Yeah.
It's not. It's not. It's typically based on an understanding and an emotion that creates an action. Your job is to fill the gaps.
Well, that's a lot of what I feel like I'm able to do with a lot of kids, is to fill those gaps. Because a lot of connections I have with them is similar to what you just described with the class that you were working with, is about connecting with them and getting the results a lot faster.
Well, it aligns with your whole program. When you and I talked about Seed of Success, right? We talked about all of the character. And I use that term broadly because back in, the mid to late 90s in education, even the 80s, there was this huge push for character education. Heck, I can remember signing a character education agreement with a senator in the town where I was working that had some good intentions to it. The fallacy in that is it was nothing but that. If those intentions aren't married into a curriculum, if it isn't married into the way schools operate and conduct themselves, right, in terms of expectations, and I don't mean of children, whatever expectations you have of students, you must first begin with the people who teach them. You must first begin with that. So if you don't have teachers who, I don't mean espouse these beliefs, because people can say anything. We live in a world where people just talk, right? You know me, dude, you can talk all day. You better show me something.
Right.
So you can tell me all you want to, but the evidence is in your actions, right? So you're looking for teachers who, when you talk about these concepts that we call values, right? Do you demonstrate them? And I use them in my interviews when I interview teachers. Well, how do you feel about this? People can easily tell you how to feel about it. They can easily tell you what they think about it. But you ask them, well, what would I see in you exercising that particular? Boy, you could hear pin drops and you could hear like egg scrambling because they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Well, you're not really doing it. You're just used to talking about it. Next, send me in somebody else because this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not here to grow you up.
Right.
Not that way.
Yeah.
Because that's a risk to children. And this is something that we've missed in setting the bar. And it's changing today. You know, education is changing, but is in a constant state of change. Everybody says this every decade. Education is changing. But let me tell you a little secret. It's always changing. And it's never been fixed. And it's never going to be fixed. Everybody keeps waiting for this one solution. It is a system that has proven itself in this moment in time, if anybody's paying attention, to serve itself.
Yeah. It's just a revolving.
It serves its continued existence. We will argue over whether we're going to put seatbelts in buses to save kids' lives. You know why we don't do it? Because it costs money. But we'll buy bullets.
Right.
We'll buy bullets, but we won't put seatbelts on buses. So you lost me with anything else that comes after that. When it comes to children, look at where you invest your money, right? Because the people that you are forgetting about, the people you're not investing in, because when you look at the conversations, the discussions between parents and school boards today, they're not in agreement about anything. They're now having the very realistic discussion about who gets to determine what we get taught. Who gets to make that decision? Does it have to be a fight? Why does it have to be an argument? Well, it has to be an argument because everybody went to school. You know, the government got involved trying to create a national curriculum. Understand one thing, all curriculums, the concept of school were all born out of local communities from the very beginning. And you know what the curriculum was? It was based on the economy of that locality. So if you lived in a farming community, every little kid learned how to farm. That's how you ensure that community's continued existence. Right?
Right. So a national program wouldn't work. That's why it wouldn't work. Well,
now you have a bigger discussion about where's the country headed. You can't build a curriculum if you can't tell me where we're going. So imagine that. I would love to sit with, I don't care, any congressman, the president. Where are we going, man? Tell me where we're going to end up in business in 5 years. What new skills and concepts will we need to learn? How's that going to be reflected in our curriculums to make sure our kids can be competitive? Oh, and by the way, you're going to have to prove it to me. Don't tell me, don't give me words. Don't tell me what you think. You better show me. Right? Well, that never happens. So you have a system that I believe is requiring the voice of parents and communities more so now than it ever has, because parents are the original teachers of their children. There is a concept that every teacher in undergraduate school knows. We're all taught it, that part of your role, one of your primary functions beyond being a teacher, not an instructor, that's a whole nother conversation, is a Latin term that's in loco parentis. It means in place of the parent. So it's like an oath that you take, that you act on behalf of every young person in front of you as if you were the parent. Why? Because the parent was the original teacher and is always the teacher. You're not the one who decides the course for their life. You just add information and value to what parents can work with, right?
Right.
It should not be opposition. the number one responsibility of teacher, not the number one, but it's a key element of it. It's underlying all of it. You must operate in place of the parent. So going back to the value conversation I would have with potential hirees and teachers about values, what are they? What is valuable to you? What do you think about it? And by the way, how would I see it? Well, this is one of those litmus tests because it's an underlying piece of how would you parent the children we're now responsible for.
You make a valid point because it's one of the things I hear from kids when they talk about teachers and you talk about investing in it, them being able to show that they can teach and not talk about it and be able to show you and not just, be about it. They got to be about it. A lot of the kids get frustrated because they feel like they know more than teachers. And to me, that's a sign that they're not truly invested. But that's not just the teachers, but like you're saying, it starts at the top and trickles down. So they're not investing in the ones that are responsible for teaching the kids.
Yeah, and I think we as a society have handed off way too much in defense of schools and teachers. Here's the other side of this coin, because there's two parts of every conversation. Schools over the last 60 years have taken over the responsibility of parenting. More and more social demands, social support systems have been placed on teachers to the point that teachers are going, am I teacher first or am I babysitting first? Am I a counselor? Am I a psychiatrist? What am I? Am I a social worker? So there's a whole litany of stressors that have been placed on teachers, which is why I had to change what and how I chose teachers because of this overpressing dynamic where a lot of things that weren't happening in the home, right? And we call them wraparound services now, right? You'll hear that term a lot. You know what I call it? Might wrap it up because teachers aren't going to be a teacher. They're not going to be able to teach with all these wraparound services. And I'm going to tell you why, because nobody wants to invest in additional staff and support to provide quality wraparound services. People can tell me, been there, done that. We have wraparound services. What does that mean? In some schools, it means go see this person, sit down for 10 minutes, talk about it, and carry your butt a little back seat. You didn't fix anything. You're not wraparound services. And it's not because they don't care. They don't have the resources for anything more than that.
Right.
Because we're buying bullets. We're buying guns and bullets. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we talk about school, parents have to understand, and there's something that was said to me in a different context, Coach, years ago. And it stuck with me and has always stuck with me as I look at how we financially, and why we financially support these gaps in our schools. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus is asked about taxes, and particularly about whether to pay taxes to Caesar. And Jesus responds and says, well, whose head's on that coin? And they said Caesar's. He goes, well, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Here's how I interpret that little encounter. We pay taxes for wraparound services. We pay taxes for mental health. We pay taxes for a lot of social supporting issues, particularly around the caretaking of children. But if as long as we allow those gaps to exist in our homes, we're going to continue to pay for them. If we don't want to pay for them, then we take care of what's in our home. So as long as you don't take care of them, you're going to pay Caesar.
Yeah.
You're going to pay him. So stop complaining for having to pay Caesar for what you haven't done.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Well, if all of a sudden, we start having look at every service that we pay for. Now, I'm going to take out mental health. Just exclude that one. It's too finite, too complicated, and there's a host of variabilities in that one. But if anybody were to take a look at any of the social programs that we pay for, there's always been an argument that we create dependency. I don't think we call it dependency. I think it's we're assuming accountability for things that others won't.
Right.
And as long as you do for me, ain't no reason to. It becomes, and each generation grows up with it as an expectation, not knowing the absence of that thing.
What's the best? Yeah, and what's the best example of that that's happened in the last 2 years, and we're still feeling the effects of it right now? Employment, the employment situation, perfect example of that. You know, you have restaurants that you don't know when they're going to be open because they can't get enough people. You know why they can't get enough people? Because they're getting checks from the government for unemployment, and they're extending that instead of going back out and working. So as long as it's being available to them, they're going to take advantage of it, and society suffers. And you talk about the other aspects of it as it relates to kids, talking about development and kids in the workforce. Well, they're not getting good leadership because the owners of these businesses can't get good managers because they can't afford to invest in the training to teach them the right way. They just get them in just to keep the doors open, to make the money, to keep the lights on, to keep the products coming in, and just to keep selling products. But in the end, that cycle like you're talking about, it just continues. And I think we just get further and further behind as those processes are allowed to continue.
You nailed it. This goes back to asking, where's our country going?
Right.
We are becoming more of a service-oriented country. We don't make it. America, what does America make anymore? What do we make? We don't produce a whole lot of anything comparative to what we did in the previous 80 years, right? The other thing that people, when we start looking at our children and our which is the future, we call it future generations, blah, blah, blah. Boy, these are the people that are going to be nursing your little butt when you're in the hospital. They're going to be running the country. Here's a demographic piece of data for you that should put this into context. If nothing else ever will help us realize this is our future, this should. America is aging. We have more people over 50 than we've ever had. Ever, right? I read a statistic years ago that 19,000 people turn 65 every single day and will for the next 18 years. Baby boomers. So in each generation after baby boomers, there have been fewer children, right? So people are having fewer and fewer children. We already know this. Well, this is going to be an upside down dynamic. Part of our country's success has been this huge baby boomers have carried the market for so long. Now they're at the end of their careers and there are fewer people there to support them, to pay into Social Security, to pick up where they left off. So do we have time to continue to let these gaps exist? We don't. What are the risks if we let these gaps exist? So when we keep talking about, well, this school board arguing about this, and like y'all sitting down looking at the ground and an anvil's about to drop on your head.
Yeah.
Where are you looking? So when I listen to people talk about education, if they don't even demonstrate the awareness of the impact of where they're going, I first take the opportunity to get their reaction to that demographic data within their own communities, not broadly, not across America, because they don't care. Let's talk about, whatever your town's name is, whatever your city.
Yeah, Podunk, Alabama.
Doesn't matter where, it could be a major city. Here's the reality. Take a look at your demographic data and you tell me in the next 20 years where you're going to be. And you better be looking at those little third graders a little differently. You better be looking at them fifth graders a little differently. You better be creating some apprenticeship programs for these 16, 17-year-olds. And by the way, who is going to be taking up these contracting roles and jobs that we can't find people to do? Because you're still going to have your plumbing fixed. You're still going to want that addition on your house. You're still going to need it. Who's going to do that for you? Because you cut out all the trade programs. So we're not thinking in terms of, I haven't seen it. I've seen that absence. That it existed 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It existed. Remember what I said. Every generation is talking about education, is talking about when they went to school.
Right.
When they went to school. We have computer, they talk about technology in schools, man. We got schools across America don't even have internet. But they talk about every kid has that. Boy, man, what? Who you talking to? Who you talking to? Talking about pie in the sky stuff and letting everybody think that everything's equal. It ain't equal, bro. Who are you talking to? You must be talking to a small segment of people, because you're not talking to everybody. So this is why the concept of education has to be taken back by the parent's voice. I'm not asking you, man, stop asking for people's permission to do this or that. I'm not so sure the brick and mortar model exists as a functional application anymore. I don't know if it has relevance in the 21st century.
I think that's becoming pretty prevalent with a lot of the online schools that are coming on, and people are they're opening their eyes and ears to hear what it is all about, and people are drifting to it. I can tell you, me personally, with the programs I have, I've had a couple of online sources reach out, because they like what the value that my programs can provide. So they're seeing that too. So if other online people are reaching out to others, everybody's kind of starting to see the same thing you're talking about. It in the brick and mortar, it may be going by the wayside. They're tearing down schools to build new ones. Well, who's going to be sitting in them? Because parents are starting to they're getting woke to what's going on with education, with the education system.
Yeah, and to go back to my Caesar social programming and wraparound services, it's not that parents don't care. I've always said this. I've said this to every teacher, assistant principal, and principal I work with, especially when they're complaining about a parent. I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying your complaint's not legitimate. Probably is. Most of the time, yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement. But it's an understanding about it. Remember this, no parent comes to you and says, well, I don't know, some do. Most don't come to you, say, I'm just going to be a total jerk. Oh, I've had those. Everybody's had it. Most of them are bringing you the best that they got. And you know why that's the best that they got? Because that's the best they've been given. So the kid that you're looking at can only give you what they've been given. Their parent is no different. Your parenting style is going to be based on what your experiences were. You're not going to pull out of the ether and say, oh, I'm going to do this, and I know exactly how to do it. You won't. You're all based on experiences, right? So your programs like yours, the Sea of Success, that have these values, but more importantly, the thing that's always missing, how? How do you go about doing that? What does it look like? What's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? No, it's not through kids learning. I have found that parents see opportunity to reinforce something that they would not have known how to do on their own. It becomes a valuable asset to them, right? Right. It's no different than a kid deciding what sport do you want to play. The parent's going to support the sport that the kid has the most aptitude for, the one that makes them the happiest, the one where they're not struggling the most or facing all kinds of challenges or demoralize them. They're going to pick the one that their child is happy in and they can support, right? And this is why programs like yours are helpful. Beyond just espousing what they do, the idealism of it, it's the practicality
of it. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And listen, thank you guys so much for listening. I'm Coach T, and as always, I'm here to educate, support, and inspire the next generation of leaders. Until next time, take care.